Three, two, one.
Yes, that was very synchronized. It doesn't always happen like that.
Um, well, so excited to be joining with everyone today, and so nice to be sitting down in person here at AIM 23. Let's see, Dr. Dow, can we start with you? Are you okay if we call you Tony for this recording?
Yes.
Wonderful. And do you mind sharing a one-liner about yourself, just a little bit about where you are professionally and then something outside of medicine as well?
Sure. My name's Tony Dow. My pronouns are he and him. I'm an associate program director at Washington University in St. Louis, and I really enjoy biking around St. Louis. So,
Wonderful. And Dr. Chang, is it okay if we call you Chelsea?
Definitely.
And Chelsea, could you also share a bit about yourself and something you like to do?
Yes, thank you. I am an associate professor of internal medicine at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, which is in South Texas. And I am a triathlete. I just did my most recent triathlon this weekend on Ironman in Galveston.
Wow,
very
amazing.
cool.
Congrats.
And Dr. Lee, are you okay with us calling you Sonny for this recording?
Absolutely.
Perfect. And could we hear from you as well?
Sure. My name is Sonny Lee. I am an associate professor in both internal medicine and pediatrics, so MedPeace trained. I'm currently the internal medicine program director at Loma Linda in California, and I am not the athlete that Chelsea is, but I pretend to be by following my daughter while she plays softball. So that's my favorite thing to do. So.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, for all of you all, we're so excited to be sitting down in person in Austin and wondering if y'all can share your favorite part of maybe joining AIM this year or kind of being a part of the Alliance in general. Maybe, Tony, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So I had joined AIM a couple years ago when I became an APD, and then my program director encouraged me to apply for a task force, and so then I signed up for actually the interviews task force and got in, and it's been really good meeting other people from throughout the institution and or actually throughout AIM and just kind of meeting people and kind of learning new ideas and sharing it with my program.
Yeah, similar experience. I just really enjoy getting to meet people from all across the United States that have this passion for education. And I've gotten to do workshops with people from all across the US and just learn about all the amazing ideas out there.
Very similar. I've been part of AIM, I think, since 2006, and one of my favorite parts of coming to meetings like this year and any year is collaborating and meeting people from other places and you come away with so many great ideas that you have to kind of temper yourself a little bit when you go home. But that's one of my favorite parts is to feel that energy that to number one, that we're all in it together. But number two, there's so many great ideas that we haven't thought of yet. And so that's one of my favorite parts of coming to these meetings.
Fantastically. I've been very impressed with the energy and just reaching out, cold emailing you guys, and very appreciative of your sharing your knowledge around this and what you've prepared for the workshops today. So in the interest of time, we'll jump into a case.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about Sylvie's case from Cashlack Memorial. So Sylvie has just taken on the role of program director for internal medicine at the residency at Cashlack. And she has set a goal for herself in terms of improving the diversity within her program. It's one of her real privileges and priorities to make this kind of part of her vision as program director. And she wants to start with reviewing the interview process and seeing what changes can be made to really support inclusivity. And maybe we'll start with Tony, thinking about kind of Sylvie's approach even well before interview season and her goals around kind of increasing the inclusivity. I wonder how you would advise her or how you would kind of help support making DEI a priority in recruitment for her.
Sure. And so I think what's always interesting is like we always lump DEI together and it's always just like it always comes as a package. But it's always kind of thinking about how diversity is really just like a time point. It's like a number. How many people do we have of each at our institution? And so really kind of thinking that as like a metric of like, where do we want to be? But also thinking about that inclusion piece, like what does that actually look like? And so a lot of us will kind of go back and think about, what's our goal, what's our purpose of wanting a diverse workforce, and like how's that going to impact both our trainees as well as our community, and thinking about, how can we set goals for those. And then also thinking about, demonstrating inclusion is really kind of like a throughout the year process. And so how can we think about, how can we show applicants who are applying, how can we show them that, this is a great place to be, not just during recruitment, but all throughout the year. And so really thinking about what's your strategy for the whole year, right? How are you going to demonstrate inclusion? And then for which groups are you really going to try that for? And that kind of goes back to like, what are your initial goals? So.
Well, thank you for highlighting that importance of sort of working through it well before the interview season. Once Sylvie and her group have decided what their metrics are that they want to really focus on, and they've established some programs to try to support inclusivity throughout the year, how should she best communicate these to prospective applicants? Are there ways to improve visibility around this?
Yeah, I think when you're doing something all throughout the year, and you have kind of like your clear goals in mind, it's really easy to kind of just demonstrate during the interview day, like, hey, these are all of the things that we've accomplished. A lot of programs who may not have the diversity metrics that they're looking for might want to just talk about like, what their plan is and how they've done, kind of like how we showed during our workshops, like, this is the progress that we've made so far, we're not done yet. But really sharing, with the applicants, like these are all the steps that we've done, and really not thinking about like when they get here, like telling you what you're planning to do, just really showing them what you have done. And so I think that's the easiest way of doing it. But obviously, a lot of us use social media to kind of explore all of these things and like show, but it's really easy to kind of highlight things that you want them to see. And so just being able to demonstrate, accomplishments that you've done. And just, I think for the visibility portion, especially for people of like underrepresented in medicine or LGBTQI plus or international medical graduates, it's really hard for people to see people like themselves at your institution. And so, what we do is we make sure that we like highlight those faculty. That way, like they know who's at our institution that, you belong here too and that you should apply here. So that's how I would help create visibility, is just making sure that they know who to reach out to during that interview season.
I love that, Tony. And my question kind of to follow up on that is, and Chelsea and Sunny, please weigh in as well, is when you're thinking about even the metrics and the programs and kind of defining what your goals are, do you also make that process visible to the applicants? Like we went through all of this and kind of came up with these goals, like these are our program values, this is how we define diversity, or do you move more into, and here's the success that we've had with the program, kind of practical for anyone listening out there hoping to increase their, inclusion?
Yeah, so I'll speak more specifically for kind of like the work I do in my program. So I lead a program called OutMed, which is our LGBTQ plus organization, and really thinking about. So what we do is I kind of talk about some of the programming that we've held, and the number of people who are coming to this, and how that impacts our community both within our residency program as well as within our school. And so at least for LGBTQ plus applicants who may not feel comfortable coming to the Midwest and Missouri, it's really important to highlight, the community that we have here. And so I give them a very big open space to ask questions about what's it like to be out in St. Louis, what are the available options that we have here. And that's, I think a lot of times what people are thinking about. And so I would say that's one example. And then we have different groups that represent different like diversity. Mm-hmm. And we have each of those groups kind of demonstrate what they're doing to impact, women in the promotion process, getting hired after residency. How are we supporting underrepresented people in medicine? Mm-hmm. What does that support structure look like? And then we just share it with them.
Awesome.
Right, I would add to that the website is so often where that initial contact is made and where residents will go to learn about your program, or applicants at that time. So really ensuring that your aims are clear, not only your general program aims and your values, but your metrics for selection of interviews. And are these required, or are these recommended? Are they preferred? Just really review that literature so you have the clarity, and that can help address some of the issues that all program leaderships and residents face with the application inflation and just dissatisfaction if there's not clarity from the program's perspective on who they're trying to recruit into their program.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have that much more to add, to be honest, because that was really well covered. But I think I would just highlight the use of the website and pictures, of faculty and of residents and even fellows as well to kind of help highlight that kind of diversity that you do have, and to try to again show that you belong here as well too. So yeah. So.
Amazing. And Chelsea, your workshop was specifically around the unique role of international medical graduates. Can you talk more about the unique role that IMGs are playing in providing medical care in the U.S., especially among the internal medicine programs?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think it just so your perspective on IMGs tends to depend on, the environment that you've been in. And I personally trained at a residency that really didn't have very many IMGs. And then I moved into this leadership position now where I'm the assistant dean of GME of programs that are majority IMG. And so that's kind of where I come from today is being transplanted into this and learning about it through getting to work with these wonderful programs. And I was shocked, and a lot of people are shocked to know that 25% of practicing physicians in the U.S. are IMGs. Mm-hmm. So 1 out of 4 every practicing physician of all specialties are international medical graduates. So it's a huge workforce that's really providing a quarter of the care in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And then with our group here with internal medicine, it's even more prevalent. About 39 to 40% of practicing internal medicine are IMGs. And same thing with the incoming class. So this recent match season was also right at 40%. Mm-hmm. So it's a really large group. And so not only are they providing access to care, but there's some features that they especially excel in. They're bringing this cultural competence, they're bringing proficiency in second languages, and studies show that they tend to serve more of our rural, underserved areas. So that's a huge need for the U.S. healthcare system.
I was going to say my personal experience was in residency. I trained with quite a few IMGs, and many of them had been practicing physicians in their home country for several years before they came. And so clearly they were much more prepared than I was coming straight out of med school. But it seems like there is still a challenge for them to match some of the best programs because it hasn't been seen as a place to look at inclusivity as much. So I'm glad you're bringing some work towards this.
Thank you.
What are some best practices for training faculty before the interview day? Can you talk about the role of implicit bias training?
Absolutely. I think this is definitely a field of ongoing research as far as what is effective, not only in the short term, but in the long term in changing our behaviors as faculty. I do want to highlight that AAIM did a wonderful piece in 2022 on best practices for interviewing. I know they've got QR codes all around this conference about these recommendations. They're very excellent, and they also have recommendations for the different groups that you may be trying to particularly recruit in your program, such as LGBTQ or IMG or URIM. And so there's a wealth of information there. Briefly, implicit bias training, the most common one I think is the Harvard IAT. It's free, it's very short in time, and we do know that it raises our awareness of our own biases. So it's a great starting point to looking at bias in your interview season and your faculty if you were just getting started.
I was going to just add, because I totally agree with everything Chelsea just said, but I think the important thing to also realize for the audience is that just being aware is not enough, right? We oftentimes think of hey, let's do this IT and so I'll be aware. That's not enough. You have to take an additional step to try to do more work on that. So while yes, I totally agree that the Harvard test is a great start, it can't stop there. And like you said, there is a lot of ongoing research. So I don't know if there's truly is a best practice per se, but I think, but certainly to realize that to be aware of what your implicit biases are. and then following up with how to combat that, I guess, if that makes sense.
And I would love to hear more in terms of those best practices, thinking about like, is there things that you do at your institutions or maybe things that you presented as part of your workshops around what can be done? Before we launch into that, I did want to take a step back to hear maybe y'all's experience about how the inclusivity or the kind of recruitment efforts that you do for faculty development and the visibility efforts also kind of land with applicants. Like, is there any data around the people who either match with you or interview with you saying like, wow, I'm really impressed about the way, Chelsea made me feel like I belong, to use your term, Sonny. Like, is there anything, do we have any data to say that, yes, this is a effective strategy or this works well?
So there was a paper published a couple years ago for kind of exactly this topic for underrepresented medicine applicants and how they viewed, and they kind of highlight just like pre, during, and after the interview what really meant most to them. And a lot of it kind of centered around just like, what actual programs exist and then kind of like being reached out to you with like sincerity, right? Like, like during the interview day talking like, is there really a future? And then being able to connect with the residents who are there who could actually give them like, the inside scoop.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I wonder if your programs are kind of using that work to say for our recruitment efforts or for our faculty development, whether it's months ahead of recruitment, weeks ahead, we're going to try and use some of those best practices. Is that something that feels familiar or is happening at your institutions?
Yeah, we do faculty development like right before the interview season starts. And then also, I think we'll get into like strategies later, but kind of how we build in like our scoring system is trying to get rid of a lot of the added bias that would have come in. And so we just kind of don't let it happen. And so
As much as possible.
Yeah.
As much as possible.
Yeah.
I'll add to that. It is required. I mean, we often go back to the ACGME for everybody in leadership, and it is one of the requirements that we have an ongoing systematic recruitment and retention of a diverse workforce. So it can help get your institutional leadership and your program leadership motivated too because of that requirement, and then you can jot down those events that you held and screenshot that website and just get the credit for that work too in your accreditation status. So that's a plus and something that the ACGME has added to increase the likelihood of these happening.
Yeah, I have a hard time getting all my interviewers in one place. So our faculty development tends to be more year round, and it has bits and pieces of all these topics in kind of on a year round basis. But for the interview itself or the interviewers themselves, kind of like what Tony said, we try to make it so that they can't with some of our forms and the scoring rubrics that we have used to try to avoid some of that as well too. But
And I think that's a perfect segue, Sonny, into using scripted questions and standardized interview questions. What are best practices for coming up with those, and how do you sort of decide what those should be?
yeah, so I think we all should start with who you're looking for, and actually even before that, what your program and institution is about, and utilizing, say, for example, your mission statement, and utilizing your mission statement to come up with some maybe key attributes that you're looking for, that you want to measure in your interview process, and then developing questions based on those attributes to try to gauge that in your applicants as you interview them. The idea, of course, is not to necessarily come up with a question that is that has a clear right or wrong answer, right? Because then it may enhance this social desirability when the applicants answer questions. So you want to ask it in a way that you can kind of really gauge what they're about as well too. And so I know, for example, I think we talk a little bit about either using behavior-based questions or situational-based questions. That's a really great way so that it's not a clear-cut answer that you're looking for, or that your applicants think that they're looking for. But it's a great way to be able to gauge some of those attributes that you really want to get at. So, for example, if one of the attributes you're looking for is, I'm making it up here, reliability. You may want to ask a question about what the applicant may have done in the past that has shown that. So, in the case of behavior-based question, or a hypothetical situation, again, without a clear-cut right answer, to try to gauge your applicant's intentions, I guess.
And just to summarize that, so the behavioral question would be like, tell me about a time where you demonstrated reliability.
Right.
And then the situational would be more of, if you were the person on this team,
That's
kind of
right.
what would you do? Does that sound right?
That's correct. Yes. So the idea with behavior-based questions, of course, is that it's the idea that past behaviors predict future behaviors, whereas situationally based questions is the idea that intent predicts future behaviors. And in the end, all you're trying to get at with some of these behavior-based questions versus situationally based questions is to try to get a sense of what this applicant's going to do in your program, based on that attribute that you're looking for. And that's kind of what we're trying to get at in most of the cases when we're interviewing applicants, right? Because we know their test scores, we know their we know how well they can write, or maybe not write if they're using ChatGPT. But using some of those questions like that, you can maybe try to help predict what they're going to do in your program and whether it aligns with your program's mission and values.
I think there's a lot of these like funny Instagram like memes that come out. They're like, why are you rehashing my CV? Like, I just sent it to you, right? Like, did you read it? And like, it's like, of course we read it, right? But then I think this is a way for us to kind of enhance like this interview process. So like, I have read your CV and now I want to know these other values. Do you share these values with our institution?
Right.
And so we actually do that where we split your CV grading during a different committee. That's like a different set of people who are grading your application. And then we're looking for characteristics that also, are part of our values. And that's a separate grading system. And then we have another grading system for the actual interview. Is like what you're saying in your application, like really true with your intent and like past behaviors.
Yep.
And this may be a super novice question, but how does one try to reduce bias or kind of maybe increase inclusivity within those type of questions? Kind of as you are trying to create those questions, is it by basing it in the mission or the program goals, or is there some other way that when you all are creating these questions, you're like, this is how we're going to get rid of bias as much as possible?
I'll speak for our program, and that's exactly what we did, because we took our institution/program's mission statement and utilized that to come up with those attributes that we're looking for, and again, so we're looking at productivity, but also reliability, resilience to some extent, and then also because Loma Linda is a religious affiliated institution. Not to say that we're looking for if they're religious, but do they have would they fit in that environment? And so and it's maybe I'm stepping on a landline here, but I didn't mean to. But it is important that they can demonstrate that they have an interest in taking care of the whole person, mind, body, spirit, and that's what I mean by having that religious component as well too. So I think that's how you can try to take away some of that unconscious bias as much as you can. So developing these questions.
Yeah, I would add that I'm a huge fan of the structured interview. I think it's a win-win. It's easier for your faculty to come in. I've been in both unstructured interviews and then been a part of the change to structured interviews. And the real benefit also is that you can take as much time as you want to create these interview questions, and you can get outside consult. We're from a new medical school. It's an underserved region. There's not a lot of resources or experts in DEI. So we can write our questions and even get outside consult on the quality of the questions. Are there biases that we haven't thought of? And so I think it's a really great and accessible thing for any type of program to start.
The last thing that we do, at least with the behavioral based questions, is we actually have like these anchors associated. And so a lot of times you get this score sheet 1 through 5, 1 through 10, and you just kind of circle a number that makes you best feel like, oh, I think this applicant was a 2 or 2 or 4 or whatever. And so with these unstructured, answers, so we ask them very specific questions, right? Like, for reliability. And then we actually give examples of what a 1 would be or what a 2 would be. And so then that way it's like, we call these anchoring. And so that way, like, you're circling really like the behavior. It's very much similar to the milestones that we have. It's just like, it's not just a 5 and we're not just all.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, and that helps us at least for interviewer reliability, trying to get that same scoring for each applicant.
Yeah.
And I'm by no means an expert on this, so feel free to correct me. But in my reading in preparation for this, I saw what was recommended as some of the benefits of the structured interview is it just decreases kind of some of those personal questions, things that actually have nothing to do with their ability to complete the job, but could put people on edge or make people feel marginalized. And then also reduces some of the, I have a connection with you, we chat about something that has nothing to do with medicine, then I think you're great because we both went on vacation in the same place or something.
Yeah, that affect heuristic, I think, right? And so that's something that it, like exactly like you said, oh, well, gosh, I like you a lot because you went hiking and I love hiking. And so instead of giving you a 5, I'm going to give you a 7, right? And so that's one way to kind of decrease some of that unconscious bias that we all have, right? And because I remember early in my career going on conducting interviews and saying, "Oh man, I really like this person," and because why was I? Well, it's because they like softball like I do, and but what about how they do the job? I didn't get to ask those questions, right? So I think it's a great way. The structured interview is a good way to help minimize some of those biases.
And I was going to add, Tony, you in your workshop highlighted that you at your program specifically ask a question around inclusivity. Is that something that a lot of programs are doing, and how has that been going for your program?
Yeah, so at least when we think about like diversity or inclusion as like so at least when we're thinking about like how we ask those questions, we really want people to know too, like when they're interviewing, that this is important to us. And so we've worked on some different questions here and there, and really just the idea is asking like what's your understanding of how DEI is related to the overall success of a program, or how have you really contributed in the past, or do you plan to contribute? I think we all agree that DEI is like an everyone's job, and so just it's not enough to, like we said earlier, just to be aware of it. It's just like, what are we all doing? And it all can just be it's really understanding that commitment of like how much foresight or forethought have you put into like this is important to the future of medicine now. So we'll see kind of how over the next years if we're able to match those residents who are able to say or do what they say they were are intending to do. So
one thing I was wondering is within those structured interviews, and specifically kind of the inclusion questions or questions focused around DI, do you all provide your faculty with kind of a script, or kind of training around, and this is how you say, we now have standardized interview questions. I will now be asking you the first standardized interview question, and kind of launch into it? Or is there a more kind of free format, but also trying to, avoid what Sunny was just saying, where it's like, well, you had the same opportunities I did, so therefore I love you. And let me talk about the, skiing that you went on or whatever it was. How do you all do that faculty development piece about how to actually say the words and use, your 30 minutes or your 20 minutes, however much you're given, wisely?
Yeah, I can start. So we have an email that comes out associated with the applicant, and then just in there we have like some reminders. So we actually have like a little guide sheet that says, here are the 4 values that we have. Here are some example questions, and then the anchors that are associated with it. And then we always want we want the applicant to get to know us too, and to get to know the program and provide that, comfort so that they can ask questions. And so we don't like, right out the gate, just like start asking really hard questions. We usually kind of ask a lot of those, tell me why you're interested in medicine. How did you get interested in our program? And then we kind of just let it happen naturally. And then sometimes I'll say, like, very point blank, I'm really, WashU, one of our values is teamwork. I'd really like to learn more how you work on a team. Can you tell me an example? And then I'll kind of open it like that. And then that way I can, share with you my values, as well as like, hey, by the way, I'm getting to the standardized questions, but without actually saying,
I'm getting to the standardized questions.
without saying it. So.
Yeah.
I think back to that earlier piece about trying to be as transparent as possible. That's information you can definitely include on that email to the applicants, right? Not only what time, whether you're on Zoom or what technical things they need to prepare for. You can also say, we will be employing, standardized interview questions as an effort to reduce implicit bias. And that kind of does 2 birds with 1 stone, right? You're giving them the instructions, but also highlighting your commitment to inclusivity.
Yeah, and very similar to Tony, we have an email that I send out, but I also kind of remind them when I do my little spiel in the beginning with all the applicants together, that this is what's going to happen. But I leave it up to the individual faculty to some extent to how they start off. And but as long as they hit those questions, and I think that's what's important, because when we talk about it in our workshop, how while structured interviews are great for eliminating or decreasing bias, it can be perceived negatively by applicants, because it could be seen as too rigid, right? And so and they may come away thinking, oh my gosh, wow, that's kind of really blah interview or something like that. And so we do have to kind of balance that out a little bit. And so that's why we do allow some freedom of how to start things off, and then as long as they are able to get to those questions that we want asked, I think that's okay. That makes sense. So, but that's what we instruct our faculty in that big email. So
yeah, it's a lot to ask a faculty to like establish a connection, right, be likable, and then ask them all these questions. And
right.
Especially via an email, faculty development. They need you to learn these things, but through a written word, not necessarily meetings or kind of trainings to do that.
Right.
Yeah. And getting back to our case, Chelsea, Sylvie has been reading about this, and she's surprised to see that blinded interviews are probably better at improving reliability in interviewing. So not allowing the interviewers to see the applicant scores or application materials. What are some of the pros and cons of having interviewers blinded to that information?
Well, Sylvie would be in good company. I think a lot of people are surprised and hesitant to employ this tactic. But it is a great way to further reduce the biases, just very similar concepts to the structured interview. So like you mentioned, blinding, just as far as definitions, just means withholding part of the application. So you can determine that, based on the comfort of your program and your leadership, you want to just blind the scores or blind the medical school or blind both of those. And it doesn't have to be everybody's, so it's not that all interviewers have to be blinded, but the AAIM does recommend at least one blinded interviewer. And what that does, really, one of my favorite ways to think about it is to actually think about what happens when we're unblinded. So the regular review. What tends to happen is you review your CV. We've already brought up some of these things, right? You see, oh, they're a biker too, or we have the same hometown. These little biases start to come up, and you start to either develop a positive or a negative impression. And then we tend to use the interview to just confirm that impression that we already developed. And so if we're unblinded, we're less likely to seek new objective information in the interview. So it really helps us just make the interview truly what the interview is about. So understanding those attributes that we're trying to assess, or getting experiences that they've been through. So it really fits nicely with the structured questions and has some of the same purposes. Cons, it's similar to the structured questions. It can sometimes be perceived as applicants as, well, they didn't ask me anything about my CV, right? Or say you ask them, tell me about a hardship that you've overcome. And perhaps their personal statement was all about this life-altering hardship. And then so they may feel, well, they didn't even read my personal statement. Obviously, I've overcome X, Y, and Z. So it is very important to explain that and the reason behind it, just like you do with the structured interview.
If I can add, getting to the point of blinding scores and application, we actually did a study several years ago that should prove that, and it was really interesting because I was the control group, because at that time I and our APDs reviewed the applications, provided scoring for scores and the letters of excellence, like that. And then we also did some of the interviews. So we took that and we showed that for those of us that saw those scores, we were unconsciously biased and scored better or worse depending on their step 2 scores, for example. Mm-hmm. And so based on that, we blind all of our interviews to their applications except for their CV and personal statement, so that they can, so the interviewers can get a sense of who they are, but without knowing how they did in their MSPEs or step 1, step 2, et cetera. And the first few years, we had some pushback from our faculty. They were used to saying, well, how do I know how much I like them if I don't know their test scores? And we told them that's exactly why we don't want you to know the test scores, for that reason. And it's it's been very interesting to see that when they don't have their test scores, and of course I will have seen them all, as we debrief, they will, it's interesting that it no longer correlates with their test scores or if they're AOA or something like that. So I think it's been actually really helpful to do that, actually. So.
And for those of you who are doing kind of the blinded interviews, again, this might be a noob question, but do you all say, and I'm your blinded interviewer, or like, I have not looked at, Tony, your CV or your personal statement. And so when I ask you about this hardship, it's not because I'm being a punk, it's because I literally have not read about it. So is there kind of messaging to the applicants so that they know about what to expect there?
I think that is really critical. And I think it's so important that it needs to be in that live presentation, not just in the email instructions. So our current structure is that we have one unblinded. So one person that will intentionally ask follow-up questions from the CV. I saw this research project that's so interesting. Tell me more about it. Or I saw your community service. What did that mean to you? So those appropriate follow-up questions from aspects of their application. And so we will announce, Dr. So-and-so is unblinded, or, we'll explain it more thoroughly, but let them know that one will be asking and has reviewed the full CV, while the others are using our structured process to assess other aspects of their application.
Yeah, I let them know in the morning briefing that our interviews are blinded to everything except their personal statement, CV. So I tell them it may seem like they don't know your entire application, and it's because they don't, and so they know that going into it as they go into those interviews. And so again, transparency.
And well, Chelsea, could you give us, PodPaste, we're back in, please.
I want to do what saves time and what's free, and at least having one blinded interviewer is a really easy to accomplish take home point for your program. And so I really encourage everybody to bring that back and give that a try.
Amazing. And anything that you'd like to plug, anything you're working on or especially proud of that we should be keeping an eye out for down the pipeline?
Oh, thank you. I wish I had more personal things, but I really have benefited from the AAIM guidelines from 2022, and so I would plug those and thank everybody that worked on them from the AAIM. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thanks,
Thank you. Well, thanks so much. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Love your presentation.
Yes.
Welcome to the workshop.
And thanks for finding this time. Feels like
thank you, guys.
conference time is busy.
Yes.
Look forward to it. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right. PodPaste. We'll cut back to that first cut there that I just asked Chelsea about before. Okay, so coming back to the interview questions, some of the recommendations I saw were to encourage interviewers to limit probing questions. What's the idea behind that?
Do you know
Is that
whose workshop that was?
I'm not sure. Was it Chelsea? Okay.
Yeah.
Might be Chelsea.
Let's
Let's
take that
maybe
one.
move
Okay.
to the post interview.
That's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Right.
Move on to post again.
Great. Well, I guess maybe we can we've spent a lot of time on the prep before selection and recruitment, and we've spent some time on the actual interview day. What happens after that? Maybe Tony and Sonny, I'd love to hear from you all. How do we improve our inclusion within the post-interview season? Kind of the communication that happens, further promoting equity in that very important and time-limited season.
So I would say that I'm probably not an expert at the inclusion part of the post-interview day process, but I think for lack of better saying, the fairest or the more unbiased way is to essentially tabulate all those scores that you've had on your interview days, and maybe come up with whatever magic formula that you decide to come up with at your program, and use that as kind of your initial rank list. And then after that, perhaps making potential adjustments based on what you may want to see in the diversity and equity and inclusion. But I worry about that too a little bit, right? Because then there is that potential for that bias as well too. But that may be one of at least the first things to start with, is to, at least have that quote unquote magic formula to populate your initial rank list, and then make adjustments based on what your committee decides is important.
And when you say magic formula, do you mean like 20% of the decision is the interview and 50% is the application,
Correct.
20% is the test score?
Correct.
Okay.
And whatever it is that your committee/faculty decide is important. So, and of course, it may be different, right? Because, for example, at one place, research may account for 40%, and test scores 20% or 30%, and the remainder the interview. For us, for example, our interview, because it includes other parts, including mission alignment and responsive behavior-based questions, etc. The interview itself will account for about 40-45% of our total score, composite score, with the rest being comprised of MSPE and your letters of rec and your community activities and research activity, test scores, etc. So just what your faculty decides would be important. That's how you would come up with that magic formula.
And are you both messaging that to the interviewees when they're there, kind of whether it's on Zoom or in person? I think we're all doing Zoom at this point, but are you saying, and the way we weigh this whole process for you is that we do value research. It's 60% or 40%, and the interview is XYZ%. Is that also part of the transparency piece, or is that not mentioned?
For us, we haven't mentioned that, and so I'm going to think about it.
Now you have.
Now I have. Now I have. That's right. And so we haven't done so in the past, and admittedly, maybe is something we should think about a little bit more. Putting more effort into as well. I don't know if that's something you do as well.
What's nice is that my role in the program is it's not the program director, so I don't have that, that latitude. At least the way it works at our program is that we each have like our own roles and scoring. And so what's nice is that I do all my scoring and then it goes to the program director and then they do their calculators. When we are going through each of the applications, we don't necessarily like assign like you have to reach like a percentage point of each category. People can score points in different ways. And then, faculty members can comment on things that are very specific, thinking about, the whole idea of like fit versus culture add. And so like, oh, this application, and during the interview, like if both of them are kind of playing towards like a culture add kind of mindset, someone that is not just going to, be more of the same of what we have, but also, contribute something different. Those applications usually get flagged. And then like they go under a different review, in addition to the normal standardized. And so, yeah, that's kind of what's nice is that like, for general faculty, we're not like really like handpicking like this one versus that one. It really kind of goes down to score base and then gets sent to like a smaller group of people for them to kind of sift through all the comments. The other thing that we do is we don't talk to any of the applicants after the interview. And so I think those are all AIM recommendations for post-interview communication. But we do let them know, like, here are the people, if you have very specific questions about this, that, or the other. Often our chief residents will answer a lot of those questions. But then any of the programs that we always have the information so that those applicants can reach out. And then we have a very nice way of like writing in the email, like, by the way, nothing of what we say makes any impact in your our ranking decision for you. And we like to say that kind of out front, like, I'm specifically here to answer your question and I hope this helps you make a better informed decision, which is nice for me because I don't see like the final rank list, so I can better give them information that they're hoping for.
And I think that's a great point because I tell them I tell them personally at the very end of the interview day exactly that you will not hear from us, but if you have questions, please let us know. And we also let them know the reason you don't hear from us is because of the AIM recommendations, so that they don't feel like, well, they're not interested in you or not anything like that. And so I think that is important to kind of really point out as well too. And again, from a equity/fairness standpoint as well too. And we also let them know that we don't usually do second looks, although in the era of Zoom, we are starting to think about doing something like that, but maybe after the rank list goes in, so something like that. But anyways, I think that's not the focus of this talk today.
That was a nice teaser.
It's hard sometimes to convince applicants that you interviewing is thank you enough from us. Like, that is our thank you. Thank you for spending the entire day with us and learning about the program.
Yes.
That's it, right.
And so we don't know what to do with all the thank you emails or the thank you cards. And so we just thank you for being here is all we need.
Yes.
Yeah, I tell them, don't send any thank you emails, no certain things like that. But I do have the caveat that, however, trained like I was by my mom to always send a thank you note after interview, go ahead and do so, but don't expect a response unless you have questions. And so that's kind of our caveat.
I know it becomes one of those like, no, you hang up, because like I have also received those thank you emails and I'd be like, no, thank you for spending your day with us, and they're like, no, thank you for sharing your experience, and I'm like, we have to end this email exchange has gotten too long. It's become like my patient messages. Are there any other ways that y'all have thought about with your programs about how to improve kind of that post-interview time, or anything that we haven't mentioned in terms of kind of promoting equity, especially in that time?
So one of the things that we talk about is actually structuring structuring the talk with your selection committee as well too, whoever that's made of. And what I mean by that is, instead of having a free-for-all, and I have to admit that's how ours used to be, where someone said, "Oh, I recognize this person. Oh, why are they number so and so? No, move them way up." Or, "Oh, I'm not sure about this person." And so what we decided to do is we started looking at what we believe in is our program, meaning do we believe we are a good program, so we want to avoid admitting bad applicants, or are we a, for lack of a better saying, bad program, and we want to try to really focus on admitting really good applicants? So if it's the latter, you actually focus a lot more time on the top of your rank list. But if it's the former, which I believe most of our programs are, we want to focus probably on the bottom part of the rank list and kind of look at, are these people, are they people we should really admit in the rank list? The other areas to focus on is maybe what your historical cut lines are. So let's say your typical, you typically finish at number, and I'm making up here, 180, 200. Then in that region, you may have some discussion because that makes some difference. But if, there would be no, if let's say your program never finishes above 150, then essentially everyone above 150 is a number one choice, essentially. So there's not really a whole lot of need to talk about those. But so maybe focusing on either the very top, the very bottom, and maybe around your cut line,
Bubble.
your bubble. So that's maybe one of the time to do it. And then the other part is to ideally designate someone in the committee to be the what's the word I'm looking for? The center, essentially, if you will. So because I think if someone decides that, hey, we really need to move this person up, ideally to kind of promote some of that, to minimize bias, I should say, is to have someone who say, well, why should we move this person up? And in fact, maybe is there a reason that we should move them down or provide an alternate, if that makes sense? So, so that's one way that I think to kind of help with that in the post-interview selection process.
I forgot the question.
Sorry, I ran.
Any other best? We're in the zone. Any other best practices that you want to mention about the post-interview season, and then we'll kind of transition to take-home points, I think. Or you can even transition in that time if you want to. Take-home points.
Yeah, I don't think I have any additional.
Any take-home points?
So I think one of the take-home points for me would just be like really thinking about what does diversity mean to your program, and really thinking backwards about, what is your makeup, what demographic information do we want to look at, and like then using that, baseline data, whatever you have, to then inform kind of like other practices that you want to do, and thinking, not so much only gender or only race, but also thinking about other things like sexual orientation and gender identity. Also thinking status like international medical graduates, and thinking about people with disabilities who are also underrepresented and at like a medicine level, and thinking about how people from different backgrounds contribute to your program, and to really think about like when you say diversity, like what do you actually want from that? And it's really like you're really hoping for not just a diverse class, but people with lots of experiences who build each other up, who will impact the community, will also continue, your institution's mission of, making things better for the world, right? So it's just like thinking about like, what is it really that you're looking for, before you just start setting numbers to different metrics.
But that really brought it back to the why, which I love. I mean, we had a lot of amazing tips, but that really brought it back home of like, why are we doing this? Why is this important? And Sonny, what about take-home points for you?
Yeah, I think Tony did a much better job at talking about the inclusion and diversity aspect of it. And I think from my standpoint, my main take-home points would be how to minimize some of the biases that may go along in the actual processes. And so again, I'm a very big believer in blinding most, if not all, of your actual interviewers to test scores. But again, depending on, as I really like what Chelsea mentioned, and that is having one who's blind, one's unblinded. In our case, just with our faculty, it was much better for us to have them all be blinded instead. And so our So I would really encourage that aspect of it as well to really blind to that test score to the MSPE for the actual interviewers for those kind of other attributes that you're looking for, because simply because we have shown that it will bias your scores, if you will. So that's probably one of the big thing. And then really encourage kind of this a little bit more of this structured process as we talk at the end of the post interview selection process, because if you don't, it then turns into who debates better, and that may not necessarily make the better resident for your program necessarily. So those would be my kind of main take home points from this.
Awesome. Well, anything you want to plug? Anything from the Alliance? Anything you're working on? Anything at all?
Well, for me, we actually have our workshop tomorrow morning. So I know this is Tuesday afternoon, tomorrow morning at 9:30. So if you guys can make it, we'd love to have you there. And I know it's the very last workshop of the meeting. So we understand that sometimes people have to leave early, but if you're able to make it, we'd love to see you at the workshop. I think we're in 16B in the Convention Center.
Man, I should have thought about this before.
We're also not necessarily live, so
okay.
people
So-
will be
so
listening to this
then
later.
yeah.
Though, if you
That's
have
good.
something else you want to plug, like I don't know, like
Library of
a book, a
Valley.
paper, like
Probably don't.
it's okay, it's okay.
So,
Work you're excited
so you
about.
should probably cut that out then. So-
I can. So I'm really excited with some of the work that we're doing with OutMed and trying to create a more inclusive environment at WashU. I think it's always interesting to think about, like, yeah, we're WashU. A lot of people think we have this, well, obviously we have this very big name, a lot of research, but also thinking about, like, I want to make sure that people here are thriving. I want to make sure that they do belong. And so a lot of work coming out, making sure that, this population is recognized and taken care of. So.
Maybe I'll just
Yeah. Go for it.
So,
Yeah.
So I think my plug is to continue to encourage those who are able to attend these meetings for making these connections, hearing from these wonderful speakers and learning. I learned a lot even from today, and so I'm hoping to take some of this back to our institution as well too. So really put in that plug for AIM and for this podcast as well too.
Great. Well, thank you both so much.
Yes, great work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay! Please take some stickers,
Yeah.
take some pens, whatever
That's for me.
Yeah, the stickers are
Stickers are from
Ours,
Excellent.
This is so cool. Thank you so
Very cool.
much.
Yeah.
Thanks
For
for
this
inviting us.
opportunity. Yeah, this is so cool.
I was sweating bullets, so
Great.
thank you. Thank you.
I learned so much. I mean, I do as APD for UCSF, I do a lot of the review of the applicants or applications, even before they get to the interviews, and it just so many take home points from what y'all are saying. Like, we don't blind anybody.
I
Do
went to do
anything.
faculty interviewing, and I was like, we don't do any of this.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
probably someone should look
Yeah.
at our policies.
But also, like, we definitely do it. Introduce bias, like if you don't do some of that blinding, and if it's not, and the transparency of, like, even for faculty interviews, like, we don't tell people like what we're going to talk about during the faculty interviews. We don't.
Yeah.
So I mean, we don't blind anyone. So we don't say the same thing.
I have interviewed a few people that I was blinded to just because I hadn't read their CV yet. I'm blinded myself.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Implicit bias reduction by sheer planning.
That's right.
Yeah.
I realize how behind we are in inclusion and diversity, to be honest. So that's something we have to. I realize we need to work on.
Oh, WashU's way behind too. It's
We're all
okay.
Feels like it's all a growth edge for everybody.
Yeah.
But I think it's like listening and taking home points from other people and what they're doing well, and like what you can introduce. Because I would love to be able to come to my program director and be like, could we consider at least blinding like half of the app? Like maybe just taking out the MSPE, like something kind of like little things like that.
And quite honestly, I think the biggest bang for your buck is if you blind the test scores.
Yeah.
Especially step one, of course, is pass fail. But step two, if you blind step two, that would be the biggest bang for your buck.
Yeah.
And again, I remember when we first started it, our DIO commended us for saying for how our rank lists really did not correlate with test scores, whereas most other programs, ENT, ortho, clearly correlated with test scores, and at least anecdotally, it seems like we've gotten better fitted residents for our program, if that makes sense. So, and so that would just be my part, to be honest.
Both super interesting. Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again for inviting us. We
Yes,
appreciate it.
of course.
Can I take this off?
Yeah.
Oh, we're not worried about it, 'cause then we'll have to move.
Maybe not worry about because I'm gonna have
Yeah,
more people.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Welcome back to the Curbsiders Teach Season 3, our mini-series on medical education. I'm Dr. Molly Heublein, joined by my co-host.
Dr. Kryzhanovskaya.
We have a special episode today, another episode from our recordings here at the Alliance for Academic Internal Medicine at the AIM Week 23. We get to actually sit down with our guests in person, which has been so fun. We are talking about best practices for inclusive interviewing. And before we talk more about that and our guests, Yura, could you remind the listeners what we do on our show?
Sure, Molly. We are the Internal Medicine podcast for all things medical education. We use expert interviews to bring you teaching pearls and practice-changing knowledge to, again, inspire the next generation of medical educators. And we are pumped because we are sitting down with Dr. Dow, Chang, and Lee to talk about exactly what Molly mentioned earlier, inclusive interview practices, but also all along the interview season, before the interviews happen, in the interview, and what happens after interviews. So lots of pearls to take home.
This episode is a quick turnaround episode, so it will not be available for CME, but most of our episodes are available for free CME. You can check out our website, which has been recently redone. It's beautiful. Lots of great information on there, show notes, transcripts. And we do also have a Patreon, so we very much appreciate your support.
Highly pleasing to the eye, that website.
Yeah. So without further ado,
Let's get to it. I forgot that, should we be mentioning the Patreon? It's not for just us, right? It's for like all
it's for Curbsiders. I hadn't. I forgot to.
obviously have
Yeah, I figured we hadn't done that. Well, Ira, that was so fun to sit down in person and get to talk with these three great doctors about their workshops today and just really think more deeply about interviewing and how to improve inclusivity. What take-home points do you have?
Molly, so many. I was mostly just kind of pausing to reflect on the fact that so many things of what they were saying, I need to take home back to our institution and just kind of see if we can shake things up. And I think the one thing that Chelsea talked about a lot was kind of the blinding of the interviews. And even if there is a way to blind to a part of the application, maybe just the test scores, just the MSPE, kind of what that might introduce into the interview, or maybe remove the introduction of bias into the interview. What about you?
Yes, I mostly do faculty interviewing, and I, in doing this episode, felt a little cringeworthy about all of the best practices that we are not yet following, but I feel optimistic that we can improve things thanks to sharing our best practices.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I think with the blinding, I mean, like Chelsea mentioned, it's such a low bar thing. It doesn't cost anything. It actually saves time for the interviewer. And, it's something that seems very doable to put into action. So I think that's an amazing one. Yeah, so many things. I loved how Tony really brought us back to the importance of defining what diversity means for our institution and defining what our goals are around that. Because that really takes us back to what specific attributes are we looking for in our applicants and how are they going to advance our mission statement. So I think using that to guide our interviews can really help decrease bias and decrease, we'll just cut off the end of my unfinished sentence.
Well, the other thing that you just reminded me of, Molly, that I really want to highlight is I was blown away by the sheer percentages that Chelsea mentioned in terms of international medical grads. It's also very personal because two of my two parents are international medical grads, and it just says something about kind of who the workforce is and who's taking care of historically marginalized communities as well. So I think asking the question, just like you were saying, asking why aren't we more inclusive of IMGs? Why are we not changing our practices to highlight kind of the role of IMGs in our interview and in selection? I think is going to be really important.
Absolutely. Well, this has been another episode of our Curbsiders mini-series, The Curbsiders Teach. Get your show notes at thecurbsiders.com/teach. A special thanks to the Alliance for Academic Internal Medicine for supporting us at this conference here today.
Thanks, AIM.
Thanks to Dr. Matt Watto and Dr. Paul Williams from the Curbsiders for their support in this project, and to Dr. Stuart Brigham for composing our theme music. Thank you to PodPaste for editing our audio and supporting the podcast. Also to our social media team, Andrew Delat on Instagram and John Ung on Twitter. Until next time, I'm Dr. Molly Heublein.
And we're committed to providing you with high value, practice changing knowledge. And to do that, we need your feedback. So please subscribe, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcasts or contact us at thecurbsidersteach@gmail.com. A reminder that most episodes, though not this one because of our quick turnaround, are available for free CME credit for all healthcare professionals at curbsiders.vcuhealth.org. All you have to do is create an account. And I'm Dr. Kryzhanovskaya. Thank you for joining us today and letting us bring you a little nugget of medical edutainment. Yay! All right. So I'm going to stop recording on here.